And welcome to episode 144 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. If you are looking to improve your photography, then you've come to the right place. Make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, hit the little reminder bell so you understand, so you get notification of the future episodes, and tell your friends about it as well. Today we've got 4 different people have sent in images for critique and feedback, and we've also got a question from Rosemary. So we're going to be looking at these, and some point in there I'll give you my answer to the question too. So make sure you, if you are happening to watch live, then leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Tell me where in the world you are and what the weather's like in that little corner where you happen to be. Yeah, let's make a start. So yes, welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. I can see we've got a few comments already. I can also see that I've got the little widget coming up saying that there's not quite enough data to stream smoothly, so I apologise if you end up getting any buffering going on. Hopefully it will all work out in the end. Oh, Pat has rejoined us from a slightly warmer Minehead. Welcome back, Pat. Lovely to have you back here joining us again. Roy says, sunny but cold in West Yorkshire, but all the snow is gone. Rosemary says, good morning, wrapping my head around the difference in the UK and USA daylight savings time, but here we are, yay! Yeah, glad you remembered that one. Last night I think the USA moved forward an hour, so everything's sort of slightly adjusted there. Here in the UK is in another 2 weeks' time. In 2 weeks, the last Sunday of March, we will shift forward an hour. So we'll, for those of you in North America, we will catch back up again. And for those of you in the rest of the world, especially sort of further east, then you may well find that there's an hour's difference there as well. But if you're ever unsure when you wake up in the morning, double check Google on the time difference. But we should be stable now for the next couple of weeks, and then everything will change on the 27th? No, 26th. Well, whatever the day is. Anyway, the final one is Sunday. Totally forgotten what day we're on. What else have we got here? Oh, Maggie says, wet and grey here in southwest Scotland, which it is, true. After the beautiful but short-lived snow. Yeah, it was gorgeous when the snow was out. Unfortunately, yes, it disappeared in the rain last night. Robert joins us, says howdy all from Texas. Maggie's also saying good to see you back here again, Pat. And Pat's saying good to be back. Oh, Anne's joined us also, says good morning from Dallas. Peter says hello from a cold and wet Annan in Dumfries and Galloway. And Anne says weather here is mild but supposed to reach 80 today. Wow, that's not. I think it's actually reached 8. Well, that's Celsius here as opposed to your 80 Fahrenheit there. Meg says hello, everyone. And Peter says hi to Meg as well. So here we are. That's great. We've got people in. We've got pictures to look at. We've got questions to ask. So actually, I'll tell you what. Let's make a little note start on this question bit, because I thought it was quite a good one. That Rosemary sent in a question last week and for this Sunday and said, what have you found to be the most useful step or strategy to improving your photography? Now, I did put it into the Facebook group. I got one comment back from Viji. I don't know whether people missed it or just weren't sure how to answer or meant to come back to it and completely forgot, which is perfectly possible. So, but I thought, well, okay, just have a little think about here. If it occurs to you, I'll remind you of the question a couple of times as we go through the course of the podcast. Just drop it into the comments. Drop into your thoughts. What have you found to be the most useful step or strategy to improving your photography? And then at some point during the course of this, I'll let you know what I tend to feel has been the most useful one to me. But I'm really curious, is there something is there a piece of advice I have given you? Or, it doesn't have to be, could have been from anywhere. It could have been something that you stumbled across by accident, something you came across on a website, something another photographer told you. Is there a particular strategy or step in your photography which you feel just kind of elevated you up to the next level, which has really kind of helped your understanding? And I'm sure everybody's got something going on, but if it occurs to you and you want to scribble it into the comments, then please do. Robert's already put in a thing here saying knowing your gear and keeping it simple. Yeah, well, certainly understanding your camera gear and your or whatever lights, lenses, whatever you happen to be using, certainly makes life a lot easier, because then if you are used to using it enough, then it doesn't need to get in the way of you taking your photo too often, especially if you're in any kind of thing which requires a little bit of reaction speed. If you're too busy fiddling around with the camera, then obviously you don't get your shot. It's too easy to miss it. But yeah, useful bit of advice that. Robert, so, okay, let's make a start then. Let's take a little look here. What we're going to begin with is, I think we're going to begin with Sandra. So, let me see. Sandra sent in this photo and said, the attached is a photo I took in Iceland in autumn on a lovely sunny day. The alterations in Photoshop were to increase the exposure, straighten and slightly crop. And in fact, Sandra did send the, where are we? She sent the original. So you can see that this is the original photo taken here, and she's straightened it, brightened it, cropped it a bit. And what we have is this real scene, and it is very autumn here. We've got the last of the leaves on the trees, all richly brown. The grass is all kind of gone. The ferns are brown. The heather is all gone. But it's a very layered photo. She's standing up on the ridge here. We can see the rock in front of her. It drops down. We've got the river below. We've got the church and a few cars. We've got people walking about. We've got a road disappearing up, and then in the distance we've got mountains, distant mountains, snow-peaked mountains, and clouds. It's very, very layered, deep photo. So Sandra goes on to say, I really like this photo. I think it's a great vantage point with good lighting, but it's done really quite poorly in competitions. So I'd appreciate your feedback. So yeah, this is one of those things. This is one of these which is a common problem that a lot of us have, which is we create a photo and to us it is, yeah, what's wrong with the photo? We put it in for the competition and it just gets overlooked. Now, part of this is, I can imagine, I had a similar, I think almost a kind of similar experience in some way. Not that the photo's gone into the competition, but part of your experience here is that you're standing on this ridge and you're seeing this incredible vista and you're smelling the freshness of the air, and you can see the depth of the landscape as you're looking several miles into the distance. And there's water and there's sounds and there's wind and there's clouds and there's light playing around the landscape, and it's just glorious, absolutely glorious. And then you take a photo, and maybe the photo isn't really capturing the depth that you fully remember or you felt you were fully experiencing, but looking at the photo takes you back there. It reminds you of what was going on. And of course you're in Iceland. Who wouldn't want to go to Iceland? You don't live in Iceland, you live in Birmingham. Quite a difference. And so whenever you see this, it's not just a case of the view that you're reminded of the whole experience of what was going on at the time. Now, recently, Maggie and I went off to the Lake District in Cumbria in northern England for a couple of days away, and we drove over, one of the things we did, we drove over a couple of really high passes, not really high for the rest of the world, around here. These tiny little narrow single track roads, sometimes 1 in 3, 1 in 4 hills, or 33 or 25% hills, depending on how you measure it, and some of them were really waggling around, and then you got to the ridge and the top, and there was this incredible drop through the valley, and it was beautiful, and I leapt out of the car, took photos, and the photos just seemed really flat. It's very difficult to try and capture a large kind of depth of landscape that really reflects what you see. A lot of it is to do with light, and one of the best ways of getting a sense of depth is to have light in the distance. So if these hills were lit up a little bit more, that would help. But we've also got this other problem that I bet you in your memory you remember those mountains being bigger. And it's again it's partly to do with the way the camera can, especially a wide angle lens, can kind of flatten down the horizon. And it's also partly to do with the way we perceive things, like the fact that we've talked before about the fact that the moon is smaller than the tip of your little finger held at arm's length. And you think, it can't be, it's got to be bigger than that. But you can block out the finger with the tip of your little finger. Try it next time if you don't believe me. But our brains enlarge it. Our brains see detail, and so add increased importance to it. And so the way we interpret the view, the moon seems bigger. When we're interpreting a view like this, the mountains in the distance seem bigger. And then it all seems quite flat in the photo by comparison. Having said that, I think that when you take the time to study this photo, it's an interesting photo. I can look at this and I can see the drop down the hill, and I can see the water, and I can see the church, and I can see the road disappearing into the distance, and I can see the hills in the distance. And I think if this was a print, if this was printed out and put on the wall, then you probably find it would do better. Maybe in a camera club, where if you've got a printed option, printed contest in the camera club, and people could see it printed up to a minimum of an A3 size, it would be a really impressive photo. But if you're talking about the online competitions, where people are looking at this on a tablet or on a phone, this then ends up being a really small image, and you're not going to get the detail. And in fact, really, what happens is this becomes very, very faint. And if you really kind of want to know what stands out, and let me just open this in Photoshop, then you've got to imagine the idea of this being much smaller, and also people looking at it at high speed. So let's just minimize this. Let's take this down to that big. Now, how much detail are you getting when it's that big? Let me just rearrange this. Don't need the timeline. What are you really seeing there? You're seeing a strip of sky, and then most of the foreground is the same colour. You're not really getting the separation between the trees and the grasses. You've got to start kind of getting in quite far before you start noticing it. And I think therein partly lies the problem, is if you're talking about the online competitions like Photo Crowd, Guru Shots, ViewBug, 500 Pics, these kind of things, and people are looking at these on a small screen at fairly high speed, there's nothing to immediately grab the attention. Ways around that, I mean, the thing is, like I say, if you were to print this up, it would be a great photo. You could take time to study it. But I think if you're trying to sort of boil it down a bit and say, well, okay, if this is only going to be looked at for half a second, what elements can I get across more quickly? And at that point, you kind of need to zoom in. If we kind of go into here, now, something like this, we're wanting a bit of the mountains in the background, but we make a focus of the church, the buildings, and something of that. However, when we sort of come in this close, what we start to find is there's a kind of big gap between those interesting mountains and the church here. So let's crop in a little bit. Let's say what we were going to do is we want to have a bit of the mountains here, we want to have this bit of river, we want to make sure there's a bit of church here, so we've got all these elements are included. And maybe do sort of something like that. So we've got enough of the mountain range. So if you do that, this is like a kind of distilled version of it. We're missing maybe the trees in the foreground, we're missing some of the mountains off to the side, but we've still got some of the elements in. However, like I say, we've still got quite a large gap between the mountains and, there's a whole ridge here. And in a way, we kind of want to bring that closer. So if I'm going to do here, if I copy that and paste that, and then drag that down, so we actually literally drag the mountains closer to the church. And at this point then, what we do is we mask that. So let me just, first of all, actually, I'll tell you what I will do. I will just take that down a little bit just so I can, because there's something I want to check on where that road goes. I think that road goes, so let's go back to here. I'll just take that up a little bit and then go back to here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to crop this down a little bit to there. And obviously there's a straight line there, but with the mask here, turn that to black. I'm going to paint out this bit, because what we really want is there's a little bit of road here, and that road acts then as a nice little line to kind of draw it up. But there's a shadow there, and there's also a kind of ridge with the road, where if we do that, it kind of blends in and doesn't become quite so obvious that there's a hard line. Just allow that little tiny bit of ridge there as well. And at this point, something like that, and you might need to just sort of adjust it very slightly up or down, you can kind of get the background in without it feeling like there's a hard line where there is. Now, maybe we've gone just a little bit too panoramic, so perhaps we can kind of draw that into there. We don't need as much of that mountain. A little bit in here, something like that. And now when we look at this photo, something like that, this photo now still has 90% of the elements. We've still got the church, we've got the river, we've got the little road leading us up to the mountains in the background, and we've got a little snowy peak over there. So that then is kind of an option. And in fact, actually, if there's another option here, which in fact, having uncropped, I'm going to go back to the, no, let's go back to here. I'm just going to increase the size of the canvas for a moment. Image canvas size. I'm going to lock it on the bottom and just take that up to 1800 for the moment. Oh, that's going to the side. I wasn't meaning to do that. Image canvas size. Lock it on the bottom. Height. That's what I'm wanting. Height. So I'll take that up to 1200 for the moment. I'm not going to use anything like that, but what I want to do with this ridge here, Control T, so Control T. If I take this and I literally, actually hold down the Shift button, stretch it up, something like that, then what actually happened? Now you've got to kind of be careful. You go too far and it's just going to look a bit too weird. But this problem of the camera kind of flattening out the mountains, so the mountains just don't appear as you remember them, that if you actually sort of stretch the background up a little bit like that, I bet you that that feels much more like the mountain range that you had rather than that. The mountains would have just felt bigger in the background. Now let's just go back here, recrop that down, something like that. And again, we've got that, or maybe actually you don't need quite as much sky with that bit, something like that, and possibly even take that level, yeah, just down a fraction more, I think. And that would kind of be probably my version of the composition of it. So now at this point, we have the buildings in the foreground, and we have the snow-capped peaks and the mountain ridge in the background. We've got the little road drawing our eye up to it as well. And so if you're trying to capture if you're trying to say what were the elements, what's going to create a kind of distilled version of it, then something like that. Having said that, I mean, we've now mucked around with the photograph quite a bit, but I can always guarantee anybody sort of standing there would probably think that that's what they were experiencing of it. So what we're really up against here, Sandra, is that, well, hold on a sec, where am I? Over here. That's what I'm wanting to do. Yeah, so the point I'm really trying to make here, Sandra, is that the photo itself is great for you as a memory, and if you can spend time looking at it, you can really get a sense of that depth. But if people aren't looking at it, spending the time looking at it, and they're not going to on one of these online competitions, then you have to try and work out, well, how can I distill the elements, what were the really important bits, into the photo? So anyway, whether you want to go down that route, whether you feel that's just kind of completely spoiled your photo, is entirely up to you. But hopefully it gives you a few thoughts and ideas of why it isn't necessarily getting the response that you would like. But thank you for sending that one in. I thought it was a great photo, and yeah, I'd love to go to Iceland. Serious envy there for you. Right, okay, we have more comments here, so let's see what else we have. Picture Station. Oh, that's Amarjeet says, hello, sir. Glad you could make it. I'll be talking about your photo in a minute, in fact. Pat says, fascinating, Sandra. Roy says, the best photo is often the one behind you. Advice from someone I first met when I first started taking photography seriously, and I found it to often be the case. That's a nice bit of information there. I like that one, Roy. I think there is a really important point in the fact that quite often when we're taking a photo, we're so focused on the one thing in front of us that we could miss other things, whether it's behind you or to the side of you. But yes, that idea of in the same position, turn around and look, and you may well find something interesting. Certainly I have a photo, I remember distinctly that happening, where I went out to try and it was a blood moon it was a partial eclipse of the moon, and the moon had gone really red, and I went out up into the hills above the fog. There was a foggy day, or foggy night, and I got above the fog and I tried taking a photo of the moon, and it was just, it was just like a little red blob in the sky. And then I turned around and I saw this valley covered with mist and Orion's belt in the sky in the background, and the view there was far, far better than the actual view of the moon, which is the thing that I went to photograph. So yeah, good bit of advice there. What else do we have here? Oh, Viji's joined us, says good evening everyone. Glad you could make it, Viji. Rosemary says, oh, thank you very much, Robert and Roy, excellent suggestions. And okay, where are we? Oh, April's here, says, hello Pat, long time no hear. Hello all, glad to watch something tranquil after my car accident yesterday with a chest wall contusion aftermath. Oh dear, that's actually, I do think I saw something on Facebook about that, April. I was so glad you're okay. That must have been seriously scary. I mean, any kind of accident is, but yeah, I mean, if you feel, presumably the airbag kind of thing, but it's going to still incredible force into your chest there. But glad you're able to join us, and yeah, breathe deep and just enjoy the photos. What else have we got? We've got quite a few comments have come in. Actually, it's mostly everybody's giving concerned comments to April. Right. Rosemary says that's an impressive edit, Kim. I imagine this is close to the feel of the actual scene. Beautiful, Sandra. I would love to go to be there, to be where you were to see this in person. Stacey says good point on the photograph, which has beautiful elements. And where are we? And Viji says, wonderful edit. The comparison with how people will see in mobile phones is really useful. Okay, right. So, just a wee reminder for those of you who have just turned up is that one of the things that we're also looking at today is Rosemary asked a question saying, what have you found to be the most useful step or strategy to improving your photography? Is there something in your photography which you, whether it was something somebody told you, something you read, something you stumbled across by accident, something you heard here on the podcast. No, I'm not fishing for praise, honestly. But is there something? What step or strategy have you found which you found to be really useful for advancing your knowledge of photography? Plonk it into put it into the comments here. In fact, actually, what I will say, where are we? Viji actually did give a response to that in the Facebook group and said, before taking a photograph, prepping, looking out for inspirations to learn how others have tried to compose a similar shot. A little homework goes a long way. And I think that's a really good point. If you know you are going to a particular kind of landscape or a particular place, or you're going to be doing a particular kind of photograph, go and see what other people have done. Try and, look for the photos where you go, oh, wow, that's interesting. See if you can reverse engineer. See if you can sort of work out how they took those photos. Or what are the elements you like in those photos? So you might be going to a scenic tourist hotspot where maybe there's thousands of photos, but there's only a few where you think, actually, that's a really good one. What makes it good? So a little bit, or you know that you're going to be going to the beach, or you're going to be going to the jungle, or you're going to be going up the mountains. Take a look at these kind of photos. Get yourself a Pinterest board, something like that, and just really see how other people are doing it, and see if that gives you any clues, so that when you turn up yourself, it's giving you some ideas before you start, rather than just turning up and going, I've got this great scene in front of me, but I don't really know what to do with it. So yeah, a little bit of preparation, a little bit of homework, but yeah, seeing what others have done first is a great idea. So thanks for that, Viji. Okay, let's move on to our next picture then. And our next one comes from, that's right, we're going to do Amarjeet, I think, next. So Amarjeet sent in this one This picture has a story. I'm wanting to know, is it eye-catching, and what about the processing? So this is the cropped version, the edited version. This is the original version. So we can see then that the crop has been cropped in very, very close indeed. The original photo here is, so what's that, 6,000 by 4,000 pixels, I think. So, you know, it's a 24 megapixel photo. But it's cropped in so close, it's a 1,000 by 800. So it's tiny. It's barely a 1 megapixel photo, the edited version. So you've gone from a 24 megapixel photo to a 1 megapixel photo, which means that there's no information, there's very little information. You know, you barely move in and it's out of focus. Although it's lovely, it's a lovely shot, you know, little baby on the back of the mother, this one, you know, jumping in. You can see the elements of it, that there's potential there. But the problem is so much has been cropped in that you've lost a huge amount of the information. There's not much information left to play with. So it's a tricky one, because I can see that what's happened here is really you've taken the photo, and after you've got the photo, you've then gone, okay, what can I do with it? And either back on your computer or playing on your phone or tablet or wherever you're editing it, you thought, okay, that's where the story is. I'll zoom in and I'll make something out of that part of it. But you've lost so much that it's that there's not a lot left. I think it's a tricky one. I think part of it, you kind of need to be getting in closer. If you've decided when you're standing there, actually these monkeys jumping in and out of the water, that's the story, that's the important part, then what you need to be doing is getting up close. You want to fill as much of your frame, as much of your camera picture with the thing that you want to take the photo of. So if you want a close-up of the monkey, you try and get as close as you can. If you have a zoom lens on your camera, use your zoom to move in on it. If you're using a phone and you can't get close enough, then either try and get as close as you can or look for other stories, because there are a couple of other stories here. What's interesting about this scene is there are several stories going on. There is this story of the baby on the mother's back. That's one story. There's also another story over here, which is another baby on a mother's back just climbing into the water. And I must admit, I kind of rather like this one, where the head is kind of coming up. But again, we've moved in, we've zoomed in, we've lost a lot of the information. But there are further stories here as well. There's a woman here who looks like she's got her selfie stick, and she's got her glasses, and she's taking her sunglasses off to get a photo. But it's quite possible why she's taking her photo at that angle is because there might be something going on behind. Is there a way, I don't know because I wasn't there, but if somebody's doing a selfie stick, can you kind of get what they're taking of themselves in the background as well? But then we've also got, I rather like, come back to that. What we also have over here is there are these two women here also taking photos of the monkeys. And that's kind of fun as well. So if we just open up this in Photoshop for a moment, just so we can, I'll close that one of Sandra's. So we can see, now, we're still going to end up losing a lot of story here, but if you kind of come over here, something like this, for example, you see there's a story here where you've got the monkeys climbing into the pool, and you've got the women over here interested in taking a photo of them. Now, again, because we've moved in, there's quite a gap. Perhaps a bit like Sandra's one. We could maybe even possibly move them a little bit closer. Might work, might not work. There's a certain, there comes a point whereby whilst you might be able to kind of rescue bits of the photo and sort of blend it in and kind of make it look a bit more, at this point, is it really worth it? Because you've already lost a lot of pixels. But you can see that just bringing them slightly closer makes it a bit more. At this point as well, you would then need to play around with maybe creating a little bit more contrast, drawing attention, trying to lighten up the monkeys a little bit. You want the attention to know that at the moment your attention goes straight to the girls with the phone. the monkeys here aren't quite so clear. In order to see them, you've got to come down close, and by the time we get to here, we're back into this problem of the fact that it's too pixelated. There's not enough information in the photo. So basically there, Amarjeet, the essential problem that you've got is that if you have to crop so much out of the photo, you lose too much information. Even if it was a really nicely composed image, once you've cropped it down, it's so pixelated, there's not enough information to really make it. We've lost all the detail. There isn't enough detail left in it. So what you have to do is, where you can, work within the limitations of the camera you've got. If you don't have a zoom lens to get in close, look for other ways you can maximize the use of the space of the camera. What else can you take in? Can you move closer? But also, can you make more of a story out of not just the monkeys, but the interaction of the people around with the monkeys? Make a story of the fact that there are people photographing them, that there are people taking selfies. Or maybe if the monkeys are doing something else, some kind of interaction with the environment, the people and the monkeys. So this is all about trying to maximize the use of, fill as much of the space as you can. Yes, you want to have space to be able to crop in to give you a little bit of leeway and possibility, but you don't want to have so much that's not being used that by the time you crop in close, there's nothing left, there's no detail left for you to be able to do much with. So I hope that gives you a few ideas, but thank you for sending that one in. Right, okay. So what else have we got here? More comments. Okay, where are we? Oh, Rosemary says, thanks for the input on ways to improve Viji. And Viji says, well, that's something I learned the hard way, which is, to try and be as prepared as you can beforehand. And Rosemary agrees that the hard way is often one of our best teachers. Certainly Sticks tends to put the information on our memory a bit more strongly. April was asking, Amarjeet, how much of a zoom did you use? Well, as you can see, April, it wasn't really zooming. He just cropped in afterwards. Amarjeet says it was a random click. That's the reason I didn't have any idea whether it was a good shot or not. So where are we? VG says our photos always tend to surprise with elements we never see otherwise when we focus to take a shot. This is true. I mean, you can take a photo and quite often until you get back on the computer, you don't know what you've got. And it's always fun to then sort of see if you can create something interesting. And sometimes you can. But also, don't beat yourself up too much if you don't have something out, if you can't rescue something out of it. Every photo that you take that doesn't work is still practice, is still moving you towards those shots which will. Where are we? Stacey says, fascinating to see the monkeys in a natural environment or roaming free. Love it. And April says, okay, yes, if you'd had the zoom, then that would have been perfect because the monkeys are adorable. Now, where else are we? Rosemary says, by shooting from a lower level, would that naturally have closed the gap between the women taking the photos and the monkeys? Well, that's true. If you get down lower, then the horizon, the horizon tends to flatten out a little bit as well. So yes, that would have narrowed the gap a bit. Viji's having a chat with Amarjeet. Also says, lovely perspective, concentrating on the women taking photos of the monkey. And yes, okay, so Viji and Amarjeet are now swapping places in India. Okay. Right, okay, so let's move on then to just a quick reminder here that if you are finding these podcasts useful, entertaining, and you would like to support them in some way, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. And of course, don't forget to invite your friends along as well. Right, okay, so where are we? Let's move on to VG then. So VG's picture, VG sent in this one and says, what we went for a trip to Goa with my colleagues this week. This corridor path leads to a jail at a place called Aguada. Aguada? I'll go with Aguada at the moment, which is a fort. So Fort Aguada, and a tourist spot now. I had to hold my camera inside the iron bars to get this shot. The place literally drew me in. If only I had a subject, it would have been a bit more effective. A bit eerie, even my shadow refused to fall inside. I would love to know from you if this can be edited in any way to bring more shadow, depth, lights, maybe unfold the stories that are hidden in the walls. Okay, well, thanks for sending this one in, Viji. Now, I think this is interesting. This is another one of those where, so you're at this place, you've been exploring the building, you're exploring the pathways, you're looking down corridors, all these rooms, and you come across this long corridor and you think, oh, that looks interesting. We know with part of one of the fun aspects of photography is it's a two-dimensional medium. It's a flat medium, flat on the print, flat on the screen, but we use the illusion of the light and everything to give it a sense of depth. So when you have those kind of long tunnel effects, all is drawing down, it gives us this real sort of sense of moving deep into the picture, even though it's on a flat screen. And so you've taken this photo and you've captured it, but then afterwards you get back and you go, yeah, but it feels slightly empty. And part of that then is the fact you're right, there is no subject in there. We have all these wonderful leading lines, but these leading lines then don't really go anywhere. They just go to a little flat wall or a kind of dark patch at the end. So there is it's like a bunch of people going, look there, look over there, look. And you go, what am I looking at? And they go, that bit of wall. Why am I wanting to look at that bit of wall? Because we're all pointing at it. And leading lines are fingers pointing. They say, bring your attention. You there, viewer, look this way. And everything about this is saying, look this way, look at this end point. But the end point is just a bit of wall. So that's, yes, so you're right. Now, if there was some, I don't know, Hindu deity sitting on a plinth or something, maybe that would be interesting. If there was somebody there doing some kind of interesting movement, or somebody was doing a handstand, or I don't know. But you're right, if there was an interesting subject at the end, then all the lines drawing towards it would have created something a little bit more interesting. So, given the limitations of that we don't have something that, what else can we do to try and kind of emphasize this a little bit? And I think really part of this is about light and shadow as well. And what I'm going to do is, if you remember, one of the things I was saying just back with Sandra was that if you're trying to get a sense of depth, very often it works better if it's lighter in the distance and you've got either shade in the foreground or layers of light and shade. Layers of light and shade are really good, and especially when it's light at the furthest end, because where it tends to be brighter at the end, the eye gets drawn there and it emphasizes that sense of depth. So what might we do here? A couple of different things. I'll just right, so I've duplicated the layer there, and what I'm going to first of all do here is I'm going to lighten this bit. Let's just do a wee dodge and burn here, and I'm going to kind of come in. I've got the dodge, this is set at 5% midtones. In fact, actually, I'll tell you what, let's just take that up to about 10 or 11%, and I'm going to do this very quickly. But what I'm really doing is just take it, because there is a bit of light that's coming in. We can see there's a side light coming in down here, so I'm going to emphasize that light. I'm just going to lighten this bit up here at the back, something like that. And now what you see is when we look at the picture from that to that, there's now something down here which is making it a bit lighter. Now the other thing we might do is try and darken the foreground. So if I take the curves and to create a curves level, and I maybe kind of do this, so I'm darkening down the whole picture, something like that. But then what I do is, because using the mask, I go to the brush tool, have a nice soft brush, create a large, and then just click there. Maybe that's a bit too large. Let's come back here, click there. And so now we've got a little bit of slightly darker in the foreground. Perhaps what we might even do is just kind of come in, reverse that, make it slightly darker, come in a bit closer again, and reverse it back again, and make it lighter again. Click that twice. And so actually what we've now got is not just dark to light or light to dark, but we've got kind of subtle levels of lighter and darker going down. Now we've got all that. I'll select all, copy, paste, and with this one we can then take this, put it into something like Camera Raw. We can then add a little vignette because we're trying to darken these corners in to kind of just make the foreground a little bit darker. And we can take and then maybe grab the clarity tool and just drag that over so we're creating a little bit more kind of hard contrast, something like that. A little bit of vibe, no, we'll kind of leave that like that, I think. So you can now see that we've gone from that to that. And in fact, actually, if we just group those together and remove that, we can see we've gone from that's your original photo to this now has this feeling of, by using the clarity, we made it kind of grimier. By using the layers of shadow with all the curves, it's kind of creating a sense of depth. And by and by lightening the background, or the wall at the background, it's at least giving us a sense of depth going down towards something. Maybe there's something hidden just around the corner. One other thing we could possibly do, this is all sort of sitting in the same colour realm as well. So, and it's a sort of slightly kind of goldish yellowish. So I'm also tempted to, if I went up to Camera Raw here, if I was to click auto color, what would that do? Yeah, you see that gives it a real blue shift. Now, at this point, I think the blue is too cold. I think so maybe I kind of bring it down a little bit, but maybe I want a little bit more of that kind of richer gold up the top there. So again, I'll mask this and then bring in some of that into the top here, maybe even on the path down here or something like that. Now, I think it's maybe a little bit overkill, so I'll just kind of drag that down a little bit more. So we're really kind of making it subtle. Really what we're doing is just adding a little tint of blue into the walls, something like that. So a slight blue shift in the walls, and that's kind of creating a little bit more, in fact, maybe I would just kind of, wrong with that, do that X, and subtly take a little bit off the corner, something like that. So now we've got a little bit of colour shift, we've got the lines, we've got the depth, we've got the grit and the grime, we've got the shadows and the harder shadows. So that then becomes an exercise in texture and playing with shadows and trying to create extra layers of depth going into it. Ultimately, though, it's still missing the person doing the handstand or the Hindu deity or the whatever else might be at the end, which would reward us from looking down here. Otherwise, it's still kind of an empty corridor, but maybe this is the kind of photo which maybe doesn't work so much as a standalone, but perhaps as part of a set. If you had a series of photos of this fort, and this was one of them, and in other ones you had stairwells and you had, you know, a larger scene or whatever, then maybe as part of a set something like this might work a bit better. But I hope that gives you a few ideas there, Viji. And thanks for sending that in. I like I said, I absolutely get that idea of you're standing there, you see the tunnel, you kind of push through the bars, put your camera through, or you push the lens through, and you know, it's something to grab. But then it's a case of what you do with it. Right, okay, more comments. What do we have here? Where did we get to? April says, oh, that's cool looking. Stacey says, Viji, that has some depth and good lines. Amarjeet is still chatting to Viji. Meg says, I really like the details. April says, love the light all the way in the back. Viji says, oh, they're bricks, yes, because Meg was thinking it was wood. Sorry, there's a little bit of conversation. I kind of start to kind of read the conversation, but actually none of it's directed at me. But Stacey says, I like the edit suggestion of creating more depth and change in the bricks and the light at the end of the tunnel. And Viji says, wow, Kim, the layers you did, this is a great idea. The bright patch gives the illusion of some painting. Okay, great, thank you. Glad you found that useful. So, right, last call now for the idea of what have you found to be an interesting or useful step or strategy in developing your photography? Excuse me a sec. So Rosemary's question of what have you found useful? or most useful, a really good strategy for improving your photography. If you've got any last thoughts, throw them in now, and I'll read them before we get to the end, and then I'll tell you what I figure is probably the most useful thing that I've ever learned or had happen. So, okay, let's move on then to Robert, and Robert sent in this photo, very edited photo. Robert says, I took this photo a couple of weeks ago. I thought it was an interesting story, but a little blown out. I took a different photo of an old train station across the street to use for the sky. I reversed the sky on the horizon background to get the light correct and use part of the building. There is a ton of edits in this photo, and I'm not sure that it is at its best. Let me know what you think. I would like to get your take on how it could be improved. It may look a bit overcooked, but I was thinking that it has more of an enhanced feel, less reality, more stylized. Looking forward to your feedback. Okay, so this is a highly edited photo, and the thing about when I use a term, so I think, well, first of all, yes, there's something interesting here. You've got this liquor store. There's some interesting bits going on. Fun, cowboy here with the noose. There looks like, are you looking through? Is that a reflection of a lorry? Is that a picture on the inside? Not totally sure, but it looks like it could be fun. There's some a little gnome there as well, actually. Chair sitting out, little cactus sitting down here. We're into that just kind of, well, either golden hour, maybe blue hour. Maybe the sun's just setting behind the building. Lights are starting to come on. So I can see why it grabbed your attention. In terms of the overcooked editing, yes, I do tend to feel that. And it's not so much... part of that is because I can see the effect of... I know when you drag the clarity bar over too often, what happens is we get particular effects like what was originally would have been a plain kind of yellow. We see this kind of little slightly brown patches here, or we've got kind of darker brown patches in here, or around the window here, it's suddenly got darker as well. Whereas in the original it wouldn't have. And it's things like that which kind of give the trick away. The thing about editing is a good edit isn't noticed. Nobody's looking at the edit and thinking, oh, look at the edit. A good photo, they're just going, oh wow, look at this. So I can understand. Now, maybe we should show other people what it is you've got. So Robert's original photo, just to be able to show you the comparison, is this. Let's just close that one from Viji. And he also, just to show where he got the sky from, he also sent in this one. And then obviously that sky isn't quite as bright, so he's darkened down, played with clarity and contrast in order to get a bit of sky. And then the sky would have been transformed, taken over and put into the other one. Now, what we're aware of when we look at your photo here is that what you've essentially done is you've taken what is a kind of a daytime scene and tried to make it into a dusk scene. So the lights have all become very emphasized. You've really emphasized there are a couple of little lights just up in the corner here, but they're not really showing up very bright. This liquor isn't actually lit up at all, neither is that. If that is, it's not really noticeable. However, in your edit, you've brightened these up so they do look like they are kind of shining a bit of a light out. Now, where to go from something like this? The tricky thing here is I can see where you're going with this, and I can see the kind of excitement of playing with the edits. And don't get me wrong, I think that's great. I think you really should, I think going in and playing with the editing and trying to take it as far as you can is wonderful for honing your skills. In order for me to try and create the photo that you're trying to create out of this would take me several hours, which we can't fit into a podcast like this. It would, but also I would need to go off and probably check a few YouTube videos just to kind of work out how to get a couple of effects that I know I would want to get. And then if I'm going to go to several hours worth of work into a picture, I've then got to be convinced that that picture is worth it at the end of it. This is this is a kind of interesting photo. I mean, you know, it kind of grabs you to an extent. Whether there's enough in it to warrant the amount of work that's got into it, beyond the fact that can you do it, which I think is, for me, it's empty. That there kind of feels like there needs to be something else. There isn't a subject in this. There's a liquor store which is kind of a bit. There's little bits to look at. You know, there's this person on that. You know, there's this cutout here, and there's a cactus there, and there's a sign over here, and there's a little window there. But it's kind of scattered about a bit. You really, now again, a bit, you know, if you had somebody doing a handstand, you had two people having a fight, you had somebody sprawled out who passed out drunk with an empty beer bottle next to them, you had a couple of robbers charging out with a bag full of loot and shooting their guns in the air. You know, this as a backdrop is a kind of interesting backdrop, but it feels more like a backdrop rather without a kind of a real subject to latch onto. What I will do here, Robert, is I want to show some of the edits. I think what I would say is it looks like you've been trying out a lot of different edits into the same photo. And I think if you're wanting to go down this way, where you are really kind of creating stylized, shifting times of day, playing with light, start simple first. Get an image that's, say, in daylight and see if you can just work it into dark. What I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to show you what I mean. I've been thinking about this a little bit. So here's a photo of mine, right? So this photo is of the library, which is literally across the road out there. It's not quite the view from the window, but if I step outside my house, walk 10 yards down the road, turn back and face this is the view that I have. So this photo, I didn't have to travel far to get. It's a beautiful old Victorian sandstone building. I've got a nice little Scottish baronial touch with this little pepper pot turret and what have you. Now, let's say we take a photo like this and we say we want to create a nighttime scene out of it. Okay, so what I'm going to do, let's open this in Photoshop. And I'm just going to start, part of this then is to sort of show you that, you know, you can take several steps just to do something seems that relatively simple, but it's a starting point. It's a starting point to say, well, what's worth it? So what I would do with something like this, just duplicate the layer because I always do. Just as a point of reference, if you're editing photos, I always feel duplicate your first layer before you start doing any kind of editing, because if you mess it up a bit, you've always still got the original that you can go back to without having to click undo or run back through the history for miles. Now, first thing we want to do is, well, actually, there's different ways you can go about this. What I'm going to do, I'm going to say, let's make this into a night scene, but have light coming out of the windows of the turret. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to zoom in to about here. I'm then going to use the lasso tool for quickness here. I'm just going to use the polyagonal one, which allows me to do square lines, and because the window is kind of square, I can do that. So that's selected that area. I'll hold down my shift button so I can now select another area as well. And I'm going to do that and that and that, and then come across to here. So I've now got two little areas, and I'm going to create a new layer. And on that layer, I'm going to create a kind of a pale yellow. So up here, just something like that, kind of, because this is going to be light coming from the window. And then I'm going to, so put that back up to 100%, paint that. Okay, so that now is going to be light coming from the window later on. It looks a bit odd now, okay, but I've got that on a separate layer. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to darken down the scene. So say if I go to the curves and I grab the top bit here and just drag that down and drag it down and drag it down and drag it down, now it's becoming darker. Now, if I go all the way down, it becomes black. So I'm going to pull it back up to something like that. We're trying to make it dark, but not too dark. And then what I'm going to do, this yellow line, actually, I'm going to make sure is above. So now it's starting to look, you can see, that it's looking very roughly like light kind of coming out of her. Now, This still has, even though it's dark, it's still got a lot of the colour. If we're thinking about, imagine we're trying to create a kind of slightly more moonlit scene. Because this is in sunlight, we've got a little bit of shadow cast. So we may as well try and make that moonlight. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come back to this layer. And let's go for hue saturation. And I'm going to drag this, in fact, actually, let's colorize. So that's making it a single colour, and it's automatically defaulting to a kind of brown. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over into the kind of blue. So we tend to think of it as a moonlight. Now, that in itself, the whole thing wouldn't be blue. You would still get a touch of colour if it was a full moon. So I'm just going to drag the opacity down, up, bring it around. So it's something kind of like that. Okay, maybe a little bit more, until I kind of feel that it's more of a kind of moonlight feel to it. Now, what I might also decide to do, if I go back to these curves, is I want to get a couple of little lighter patches on it. If that moon was hitting here, so I'm going to drop that down to something like 26%, and, sorry, turn that to black, and just create like a little bit of, just slightly undo that, but only on the bits where the light might be falling itself. Maybe a little bit on that's maybe too much. Just take that down a little bit more. So I'm not doing it on the sides. Maybe I will actually just take up the highlights of this little bit of tree or something like that, I think. And then what I will also do is I will do a slight little burst over that window. So now we've got a sort of slightly more kind of interesting thing. Now, with this layer, we've now got these lights. They still look just like blocks sitting there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the interaction of the layer. Now, this is normal. Now I can come down, I can darken, light, color burn, all sorts of things here. And let's say I get to color dodge, linear light. Oh, linear light, vivid light. Vivid light's quite interesting. Vivid light is actually showing through some of the stuff that's actually behind the window as well. So that's making it, but it's got a bit of a red glow. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that layer again. Rather than having a vivid light, this one I'm going to do a sort of soft light, maybe overlay, soft light, or screen. Let's maybe do a screen, but then reduce it down a little bit. So now we've got it sort of a little bit more yellow, something like that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that layer again. I'm going to stick it above the top, and now what I'm going to do with this light, this level, do that as normal, I'm going to blur it. So if I go to blur, Gaussian blur, and what that's doing, you can see, is, let's tell you what, let me cancel that, let me just come in close so you can actually see what's happening when we blur it. So if I go to filter, blur, Gaussian or Gaussian blur, you can see it's creating a little bit of a glow. And the more I come out, it kind of, now if I go too far, you don't notice it. So what you're looking for is something where you're getting a bit of a glow, but you can still kind of see through behind. So it's soft and subtle, maybe something like that. And so now we're getting to this point where it's now looking like it's much more like a kind of moonlit thing with light coming out of the window. Now I've got something like that. Merge that all into one layer, and then I can finally go into Camera Raw and do a few of the usuals where maybe we put in a little bit more of a vignette. Optics, there we go, vignette, and come in here and maybe grab the clarity slider and drag that up a bit, something like that. So now we have our haunted house kind of thing. So we've still got tiny little bits of colour, but there's kind of that desaturated nighttime moonlight kind of look with glow coming from the windows of the turret. Now, if I wanted, I could have gone in and I could have selected all of the windows and done exactly the same effect, so it looked like there's light coming out of all of the windows. So what's the point of this? Now, having an interesting conversation with Maggie this morning about the idea of turning a daytime photo into night, and Maggie very quite rightly turns around and says, well, why don't you just go back and take a photo at night? Now, in the case of this, at night time, you don't get this. Nobody ever lights up the turret. And I think this photo is now looking slightly more kind of gothic haunted house kind of thing, which you wouldn't get. Also at night time we'd have the street lights on it, which would be lighting it completely differently. So I would never actually get this photo. But it's about learning to play. It's about learning what we're talking about here, what you are trying to do with the liquor store, which I really love. I love the fact that you're doing this, Robert, is that you're taking the photos and creating something over and above. You're starting to move towards digital art. Now there's a whole bunch of ranges of where we can go, and maybe it's a debate for another day. But what you're doing is you're using the photo as a starting point to build a new story upon it. Now that story might be cinematic, it might be more graphic, like something like from a graphic novel or something. But in order to do that, there's a lot of work. This is going beyond just normal editing. This isn't just playing with your contrast and your levels a bit, cropping in a little bit, doing a bit of dodge and burn. There's a lot more work goes into it. There is a kind of whole digital art level where you're starting to paint layers on top, and that's a whole range to go in, and it can be a lot of fun, and there are a lot of amazing photographer / digital artists out there who are doing this kind of thing. And so I think, if you're going to go down that route, then there's a lot of fun to be had, but understand that there's also a lot of work to be had. It's not you're now developing a whole bunch of other skills which go way beyond photography and way beyond just standard editing. But if you're going to go down that way, start simple. Don't try and sort of grab a piece and then do 27,000 edits on it. Start with a simpler one and so nail that idea of shifting things from daytime to from golden hour to blue hour, if you want to do that. Take an idea and say, well, okay, if I wanted to add a sense of a light, so there's a little light here on a stand, but there's no light on it, it's switched off. How would I set about adding that on? I'm wanting to add new textures. You're already kind of getting into the adding sky bit. The one that you've got, I could kind of see the join. The sky didn't quite feel like it fitted properly with the horizon. So if you're going to add sky in it, then that's one of those things. It's where the joins are. Certainly when you're multiplying up the photos, wherever one bit joins another photo, you've got to make sure you can't see the join. But there's a lot of fun to be had there, and I think the fact that you're going down that route is also brilliant. It's a lot of fun. It's really good. But in order for me to take your liquor store photo, whereas I've managed to sort of knock together that library shot in about 10 minutes, to do the kind of thing you were aiming to do would take me a few hours, and I'm afraid there just isn't the time for that in these podcasts. But hopefully I've given you a couple of starting points, a couple of ideas, places where you can start thinking, okay, maybe that's directions I can start playing with. But thank you for sending the image in, and I hope that gives you a few ideas. Right, okay, so what have we got here? Trying to go back here. Viji saying it was an old prison during the Portuguese regime. What does Roy say? Roy says, a well-known photographer, whose name I can't remember, once said, if you're unhappy with your image, you're not close enough. Yeah, I remember, yes, if the image isn't working, get in closer, or other variations on that kind of thing. Sometimes, but as we've also said, I think part of that comes out of what I've often said is that most photos are either not close enough in or not far enough back. So it's not necessarily the case that you always get in closer, because sometimes you want context, you want that room to breathe. But I think there is a strong point in the idea that very often with our photos we want to either be closer in or we need to be further back from where we are. But yeah, nice piece of advice, that one. Thanks for saying that one, Roy. What else have we got? Robert was saying that those were reflections of trucks. So the trucks that we saw in the window weren't posters behind, they were reflections of ones parked across the road. April says originally it's plain, did a good edit, even if it's not perfect. Oh, Pat's lost the sound. I hope you managed to get that back, Pat. Stacey says the clouds are very dramatic. Love the desert photography, especially when you find a place so remote. April wants to know if you tried that in monochrome. Rosemary says, thanks for the great ideas. I'm moving over to mobile, so can't respond in the comments. Have a great weekend. Okay, so Rosemary's rushing off. So then I think we're moving on to ours. April says, beautiful house. Stacey says, Kim, enjoying the humour. Well, that's always good. Viji says, perfect backdrop for hosting a narrative photography, a theft scene like Kim mentioned. Stacey says, I love older homes. Okay, they've got a conversation going on. And where are we? Oh, so Robert says, this is great. I think the big problem with my photo is that you do notice the edits. I have to go back to the original back over. Yeah, I think that it is one of those things, Robert, that by and large, you know, whatever edits you do, you've got to get to a point whereby that edit isn't noticeable. You don't want anybody ever noticing the edits, because if they're looking at the edits, they're not into the story. You know, when we watch a film and suddenly the CGI doesn't look right, we're no longer immersed in the film, rather we become aware of watching a film where the CGI isn't quite right. And it's the same thing when the edits aren't quite there. We start looking at the edits rather than being in the narrative. Where are we? April says, no better with the one window. Right, not totally sure what that bit is. Robert says, this is incredible how you made it look like a haunted house. I expect to see a Scooby-Doo and Shaggy walking through the scene. Yeah, it is a bit like that. Stacey says, a good edit using layers to make a good night scene. April's also well into Scooby-Doo. Right, okay. And Robert says, no worries about the time. You have pointed me in the right direction. Oh, April's referring to the light in the house. Yeah, maybe just single light or that little lights, but two lights coming from the turrets rather than everything being lit up. Okay, so thank you very much for sending that one in, Robert. And so to talk then about... So to go back to Rosemary's question, then I said I would mention how my thing here, which is, so Rosemary's question, what have you found to be the most useful step or strategy to improving your photography? And some of you might already have guessed my answer, because my answer is feedback, is getting genuine feedback and critique. Now, actually there's two elements to that. One is getting feedback on my photos. The other is actually giving feedback to other photos. Learning how to give critique, learning how to look at other people's photos and work out what they were trying to do, where they might have stumbled with it, and how they might have gone about it a different way. And when you learn to give critique to other photos, it really, really trains your eye. It trains your eye. You know, it's that if you want to learn something, teach it. You know, part of what I've been doing these podcasts now for 3 years, and my understanding of photography has taken a dramatic leap because every week I'm giving feedback on photos. But the starting point for this, for me, was 12, 15 years ago when I found a site where people were where I was able to get genuine feedback from other photographers about my photography. And this is where I started learning about the blind spots, the things that we don't realise. We take the photo, and when we look at it, our brain is filtering our interpretation through our experiences, our life experiences, the experiences of that particular photo, of what we were thinking, feeling, doing when we took that photo. All these things mean that we have blind spots towards any photo. And it's very difficult to see past these themselves. But when somebody else comes in who doesn't have all those experiences, who wasn't there when you took that photo, they see it in a different way. And then they can help you to see it in a different way. And hopefully that's what I do every week with these podcasts. So it's because of that. It's because of the fact that my photography, my understanding of photography leapt so much when I was regularly going to this site which gave me feedback on my photos. But also I had to learn how to give feedback on photos as well, which is why I started this podcast. This whole Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres came out of the fact that I realised the single most important thing you can do is to improve your photography is get feedback, get genuine feedback, and also learn how to give feedback as well. So yeah, there you go. Now you know why I run these podcasts. With that in mind, send me your images. Next week I will be doing some more feedback. I've got space for maybe 4 images. Put your images in. either we've got the Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, stick your photo in there, or email me, kim@kimayres.co.uk. Send me your image. If it's edited, send me the unedited version as well. Tell me what your sticking points are, tell me where your difficulties are, and I will do my best to help out. I can see Susan's joined us, says you're so right about the feedback and critique. Delighted you could make it along, Susan. So yes, so that's pretty much us. If you have found these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and would like to support them in any way, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Oh, Viji's also likes the Scooby-Doo and Shaggy kind of thing. Right, okay, so I will, where are we? What am I trying to do here? That's what I'm trying to do, yes. Send me your images for next week. We will do more critique. In the meantime, have fun. And yeah, keep going with the photography. Oh, also, not just the images, questions. If you have questions, make sure you send them in. And thanks again to Rosemary for that question, because I think there's been a lot of really interesting answers. Good. Take care, and I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.